right. Good morning, everybody. Awesome. It's great to have Chris and Naomi leading worship again. I know it's been a while. Always love them leading. And I'm Josh. If you don't know me, I'm one of the pastors here. I have the honor of being a pastor here. I grew up here. It's good to be with y'all. And if anybody's at home online on Zoom right now, we miss you. Come back. I hope to see you in person again soon. Y2K. Who remembers Y2K? All right, thank you. Yeah. Oh, man. Throwing it back. It was almost 23 years ago. I was 10 years old, if you could believe it or not. Eric's shaking his head at me. But I'm not trying to make anybody feel a certain way. It's just I remember as a 10-year-old, there were all these people going around panicking about Y2K. Like, oh, man, the world is going to end. All the computers are going to blow up. They don't know how to go past 1999 for some reason. And then nuclear warheads are going to get sent off, and then Armageddon's going to happen, and that's it. But God forbid I don't have toilet paper in Armageddon, right? So the stores are being ravaged, and everybody's stocking up on canned food. That's cool. Like, everybody needs to wipe, right? But what? TMI, everybody does it. Why do you act like that? I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. You got to have it. But for as silly as all of that was, in retrospect, I know a lot of people were taking it very seriously. Maybe you were taking it seriously, right? I was overly nonchalant about it. I was an ignorant 10-year-old child because I didn't quite understand it. But some people, maybe even you, were doing everything in your power to prepare for it. And this makes us think about the end. It makes us think about eternity. And that brings us to our take-home truth this morning, that what we do now matters in light of eternity. What we do now matters in light of eternity. We've been going through this sermon series, all right? What does Jesus say about blank? Going through the Sermon on the Mount, he's talked about so many things. But how are we thinking about eternity? What does Jesus say about eternity? I know as we plan for our own day-to-day things, as we go through life, we're thinking of our imminent and immediate futures here on earth, right? How can I save my money? How am I going to study for my test? Or if I'm going to study for my test? Or how are you trying to prepare for retirement? But what are the things that we're doing now that help us plan for an eternity with Christ? That's the future that matters. I mean, not that the other stuff doesn't matter, but that's the one that especially matters. Not even arguably, this is the most important, by far, type of future planning any of us can ever do here and now, because how well we plan and live by that plan will determine where we end up for eternity. So as we try and plan for our futures, for our eternities with Christ, it's important to know exactly what are the things that we ought to be doing now. Like, how do we plan? How do we get ready for that? What are the things that I'm doing right now that's helping me to prepare for a time with Jesus beyond this earth? And that brings us to our first point this morning. How we treat others in the present matters in light of eternity. How we treat others. You know, I self-admittedly, it's easy for me to love and treat well the people that I already like and know well. But how are we all treating everybody that comes across our path? It might sound like a small thing, but all the small things still matter inside of Jesus' eyes. If you have your Bibles, and I encourage you to bring them, please open with me to Matthew 7, verse 12. And as you're turning there, maybe you already had it open. You could just open up to it now. I just want to bring back and review where we've come from so far in the Sermon on the Mount, right? Here at the end of Jesus' sermon, so much has already been covered. We just said he's talked about identity, religion, anger, sex, divorce, social justice, homelessness, money, mental health, judging others last week. And here, last but not least, in our passage today, at the end of the sermon, Jesus is going to summarize that all up. Read with me, verse 12. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So again, this verse summarizes everything that Jesus has been saying up to this point. But beyond just summarizing the Sermon on the Mount, this verse really and truly summarizes all of the law and the prophets, as he says, the Old Testament good works and books that we have from there. It sounds straightforward enough, this idea. Do others as you would have them do to you. Treat others how you want to be treated. Love as you want to be loved. And it's not a new idea. We see it in other religions as well. We see it in Confucianism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhist writings, ancient Indian writings, Greek literature, Jewish sources. It's found in both positive and negative forms. For example, don't do to others what you would not have them do to you. It means the same thing as do to others as you'd have them do to you. Either way, right? But the thing that we need to catch, that depending on how we interpret this verse, it can be practiced differently. We can try and seek some sort of particular common morality that everyone holds to, or it can be a way to make the most of being treated well ourselves, prioritizing ourselves, or it can be a call to simply try and put ourselves in someone else's shoes before we approach and figure out how to act towards them. However you want to interpret it. The main way that this golden rule functions here in Matthew and the whole Bible is with the call to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Right? We know the greatest commandments. Love the Lord, 1. 2, love your neighbor. It fits perfectly in line with that. And that's what Jesus is doing. He's bringing it all together. He's putting a nice big bow on it all for us here. Some critics, they would say that the very principle of a golden rule, it assumes some sort of public awareness of what is or is not appropriate behavior. Essentially, it's tricky to assume that what it means to do to others as you would have them do to you, it means the same thing to everybody because everyone has a different sense of morality. Everyone has a different moral compass. So we're going to treat each other differently depending on what our moral compass is and how we are being steered, going this way or that. It's going to be different. But however we want to decide to go on this, the point isn't about quantity, how many people you treat well. The point here in this passage, in this verse, is about quality. How are we treating others well? That's what makes the Sermon on the Mount and the Golden Rule so powerful. Whether or not someone is a neighbor or even an enemy, we are radically called to care for their well-being. This is what the Old Testament is getting at. The law and the prophets were getting at. Whether or not you've been in the church for any amount of time or you grew up outside of the church, maybe you're new, this is your first Sunday, that's cool. But this idea, it goes throughout culture, right? Throughout our society's supposedly held morals and values, in the classroom, at the workplace, from our own parents growing up, from others' parents growing up, maybe if you're a troublemaker. There's a good chance you've heard this before. The point is, Jesus is calling us and has called us to love the people in front of us in our day-to-day lives. The people that we face and interact with, even if briefly. Like when we're at the gas station or we're at the grocery store. Even those people. Of course it means those we're close with, those that we get along with, but this also means those that we don't get along with, those that we don't like naturally or not naturally inclined to. We're still called to love them, to treat them as we treat ourselves. Full transparency, right? It's so easy to just stand here from the pulpit and say that to you guys. Sure, like that's what the Bible says. Somehow God has led me to become a preacher by God's grace, right? You saw me as a kid. I don't know how that happened. Yeah, it's easy to say, love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's easy. It's so easy to say. But it's a million times harder to do. Especially if we are super anxious or stressed over something or dealing with our own troubles, dealing with our own struggles. It's hard that these are difficult things, and still, how am I supposed to love my neighbor as myself, even in that place? But the call still remains the same. Just to try and do our best, even in those places. I want us to try a little mental exercise for a second, all right? Try and think about some of the nicest, kindest people that you know in your life. Think about them by name. All right, right now, I hope everybody has at least one person in your mind, all right? And I hope that maybe one of the people here at San Lo is on that list. But I want you to ask yourself, what is it about this person that makes them one of the nicest people that you know? One of the kindest, most loving people that you know. What is it about them? Is it the way that they always smile and ask how you're doing? Is it the way that they remember the little things in your life that you shared with them a while ago, expecting them to forget it, but they still bring it up, saying that they've been praying for you, asking how you're doing in that? Is it simply seen in their entire demeanor or manner? Are they just oozing Jesus? I don't know. I definitely know people like that, but we don't have to be the most social person. No. It's not like Jesus has called only the extroverts to love and treat others as themselves, and introverts would be left alone. Though being an introvert, that'd probably be nice, right? Being left alone. But no, that's not true. We don't have to talk to a million people. But again, it's about quality. How? What is our treatment and care of others? What does that look like? What is it that Jesus is calling us to? That's what he's talking about. You know, we just asked that question, who are some of the nicest, kindest, most loving people that you know? But now I want to ask another question. I want to flip it. Do you sincerely believe that there are other people out there who might think of you in the same light that you just thought of that person just a second ago? Do you believe that you are one of the nicest, kindest, most loving people that someone else knows? Put yourselves in someone else's shoes and how they might think of you. They don't have to be perfect, but here are some examples. For students, do we take notes for someone who's been out sick with COVID or an illness and share it with them when they get back to school? It's not a big thing, but it's a little thing that we can do to go out of our way for someone. Or if you are working, have you ever covered for someone, even if you didn't have to? It's not on your responsibility list, but you go out of your way above and beyond for them. Or to everyone here and everyone at home, are you overall generous with your time and or resources? Are you willing to take 2 seconds out of your day? Maybe you don't have to give anything, but maybe just even smile and say hi and wave hi to the homeless brother or sister, regardless of how you think they might have gotten into that position or what you think that they deserve. Are you willing to see your political opponents as people, as a person, and not simply write them off as idiotic or blame all of society's problems on them? You know, our love for God, it's reflected in our love for our neighbor. If we do not love our neighbor, then we do not love God. This is what it means when we say how we treat others in the present matters in light of eternity, because how we love our neighbor, thusly how we love God, determines which side of eternity we will get to spend with God. And that leads us to our second point this morning. This word. Thank you. How we make choices matters in light of eternity. How we make choices matters in light of eternity. We should always treat others well, but that should also be done in light of an overall attitude or desire to make all choices well. Because how we make choices now does, in fact, have eternal consequences, good and bad. Let's read verses 13 to 14 together. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. All right. So, just as you've probably heard the golden rule before, you've probably heard something about these gates before, too. And now, when I think of gates in general, I think of growing up. I was privileged enough to have a backyard and dogs, so I remember just playing in the backyard growing up. It was a great place, and don't go out the gate, Josh, you're going to get lost. That kind of thing. Or if I was coming back home, I got to see my little wiener dogs, and they're like shaking their tail, all smiling and happy. Like, I just love dogs. Sorry to you cat people. Cats are cool. I don't know. But anyway, okay. But the kind of gate that Jesus is talking about here isn't a backyard gate, but it's more in light in line with gates surrounding Jerusalem, city gates, big gates, right? Thousands of people being able to enter and exit at the same time, okay? They got to be big. Um, and yeah, that's what he's getting at. It's different than this idea of a regular sized door set to the side that's only there if you're looking for it. This is the kind of imagery that Jesus is trying to evoke. And there has been some debate whether or not the road comes first or the gate comes first. And depending on you and how you interpret this, it actually does make an impact on how what you walk away with. So, for example, if the road comes before the gate, that's like saying you have to walk a narrow, moral, and altruistic path of life, hopefully making the right decisions until one day you get to heaven, and then right then and there, Jesus decides, okay, you're good, you did all the right things, just like Santa Claus, you're on my good list. You did all the good things, you pass, get into heaven. And if not, sorry, you got to go to the other place. This type of interpretation and this type of life, it can become a works-based salvation, meaning that you'll only get into heaven if you've done all the right things. It can lead that way easily. Or if the gate comes before the road, then that means life will be filled with many decisions, and each time we come across a choice, each time we come across a dilemma, then what you must decide to choose is Jesus or not. So instead of a gate locking heaven away from us, as in the first interpretation, I believe, this interpretation, the second interpretation, means Jesus is the gate. Jesus is the gate. He is the one we are facing in every decision. I would lean towards the second interpretation, as this is the natural order and reading of the text itself. Works-based salvation, as found in the first interpretation, is anti-gospel. This is wrong and simply not true. But grace-based salvation is how Jesus continues to meet us and woo us towards him while transforming us into his likeness. Works-based salvation says you must work yourself to be saved, but grace-based salvation says you are already saved, dear beloved. We are saved into a relationship with Jesus that even when we fail and falter and stumble at times, and it's going to happen, if you don't think it's going to happen, it will. Jesus still will always remain faithful to us, committed to us as we are committed to him, committed to following him. So now, knowing that the gate comes before the road, let's examine the roads themselves. The wide gate leads to an easy path, it says here, but this is the same path that leads to destruction. This is the path that many people take and is the easiest way to go with the flow with. It's easy to do what everyone else is doing. So, for example, I know so many of you people like Disneyland. I don't get it, but it's cool, right? Disneyland, I don't know. I'd want to buy a nice meal instead. Sorry. Not that they have to be different, sorry. But if you want to take me to Disneyland, I'll totally go with you to Disneyland, okay? Anyway, the gates that lead into Disneyland Park at opening time, it's pretty packed. And pro tip, show up half an hour earlier before the gate opens at least, and you'll be good. But that's not biblical wisdom anyway. Or think about if you're a concert goer, you like concerts. Have you ever been to a festival? So music festivals, usually there's like a big main stage, right? That's where you go and see, I don't know, insert pop singer here. I don't want to get in trouble. Or you can sit off to the side, the side stage as a smaller, lesser-known artist or singer, all right? But it's harder to get to that stage because everybody, when they walk into the gates at a festival, they're trying to get to the main stage to see the biggest names. Well, the narrow gate, it leads to the more difficult path, but the path that is less traveled. It's set off to the side. We have to intentionally look for it, go against the crowd in every choice that we make. And sure, this is harder. It's going to be harder to do. It's going to lead to a path with lesser people on it than the big path. Again, this example, it's not impossible to step away from the main path. It's not impossible to step away from the crowd, but because it's so much, but it is easier to stay with the crowd. And it's the same with the decisions that we make each and every day. If there is a group of people, then there will always be a group opinion or a group way on something. And more often than not, it's easier to stick with that and what they are saying or what they are doing. But if the majority is wrong, or if the majority is leading us in a direction that is not in line with Jesus' will and his heart for us, and instead it goes along with the world's ways, then that way might be easier, but it's the way that leads away from an eternity with Jesus. While we're talking about this idea of many and few, I just want to expand on that for a second. It's important that we don't emphasize too much this idea of few, okay? I'm sure there have been times in your life, as well as my own, where I've gotten the impression from some Christians, some teachers, that there really is only a super small, chosen, highly elite number of Christians who will be saved by Jesus, and that is, of people that would be saved by Jesus. That's true to a certain extent, all right? Obviously Jesus is saying it here, right? Many, few. But what can happen with this teaching is that if we are not careful, it can be easily become, again, another form of works-based salvation, where we are guilted into acting, quote unquote, nice and faithful just so we can get into heaven. Oh, I've got to work extra hard now to make sure that I end up being one of the select few, right? And yes, the fruits we bear will reveal what type of faith we have and whether or not it's genuine, but we must also hold in the same breath other passages where Jesus speaks of many people being saved. Matthew 8:11, for example, Jesus said, I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. In Matthew 20, verse 28, in the time before the Passion Week, Jesus said, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Many. So is Jesus contradicting himself here in Matthew 7, or 6, or 7, sorry. Is he contradicting himself? No. But as in many things in the Christian life, there really is, right? There really is an unseen balance to strike that challenges us to rethink the ways that we have been knowingly or unknowingly taught about the relationship between the gospel and between grace. We may have been taught a certain way, and because of that, we might lean a certain way, but we must struggle to challenge ourselves to see that Jesus' way is beyond ourselves. In application, then, as we live life and make decisions in life, we look for the narrow gate that is Jesus. Aim to choose a narrow path and the lesser-known gate in everything that we are and we do. It takes a moment to understand this idea, but it takes a lifetime to master. Regardless of how long you've been a Christian, how old you are, or how faithful you believe yourself to be, there will always be room to be sanctified, always be room to be transformed more and more into the likeness of Jesus in every little thing that we do, everything that we say, all that we are. The narrow gate that is following Jesus, it's not going to be easy. It's not. In fact, again, Jesus says it's the more difficult path. But nothing worth having in life ever comes easy, and I know that from firsthand experience, as I'm sure many of you do. And we also know that how easy it is to lose sight of that. How we make choices matters in light of eternity, and how we treat others in the present matters in light of eternity. So what are the other things that we do now that matter in light of eternity? That brings us to our third point. How we recognize false teachers matters in light of eternity. False teachers. So there are many popular modern preachers, authors, speakers. They identify themselves and market themselves as faithful followers of Christ, but in fact are not. I mentioned some folks the last time that I preached that fit in line with this, so I don't want to get too far into that this morning, but I would rather want to lean into how we should identify them. How are we going to be like, okay, this is what they're doing. Okay, now I know whether or not they're a false prophet, false teacher, or not. All right, so let's read verses 15 to 20. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. So what's happening here? What's the first thing that Jesus does? He gives us a warning. Very first thing. He warns us to beware of false prophets, to beware of false teachers. These are people who will, right? Matter of fact. It's not like if, definitely. They're going to come like a sheep, come across as innocent and unassuming as if they pose zero threats, but inwardly, they are ravenous wolves, ready to devour us and lead us astray. So the first thing that Jesus is saying for us to do in trying to identify false prophets is simply beware. Know that they are there and know that they're going to look innocent. Beware. Second thing, all right, number 2, we can identify false prophets by their fruits. We can identify false prophets by their fruits. It seems recently there's been a resurgence in interest for gardening. I think that's wonderful, or maybe it's just because Instagram knows what my demographic of people are interested in now, so I see a bunch of succulents and stuff on Instagram. So I don't know what it is, but I never thought to think of succulents before growing up. But anyway, they're cool. You can have fresh fruits and vegetables, not just succulents, in your garden. You don't have to go to the grocery store to pick them up. That's a wonderful thing about gardening. I remember my dad used to plant tomatoes in the backyard. It was so cool just being able to go in the backyard, pick up some tomatoes, or maybe you have green onions growing in a jar, and you just pick them out for dinner, and you cut them up. It's easy, right? So simple. But would you eat a rotten fruit or vegetable? I hope not. Right? Yeah, thank you. If you come across one, you'd probably throw it away. Or if you have a compost, you'd probably put it in the compost. We also see here, grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes and figs don't come from thistles. So if a teacher is like a healthy tree, they're going to bear good fruit from their ministry. But if they're like a sick tree, then they're going to bear bad fruit, right? So we don't want to eat the rotten fruit from the bad tree that is the false prophet or the false teacher. We want the good fruit, right? We think of that instantly with food. We're not going to eat rotten fruit. So I hope the same would be in like what we are spiritually fed by as well. But what's good for us in trying to identify what is good fruit, what is bad fruit, is that we just went through the Sermon on the Mount, right? Jesus just gave us so many things to consider when looking for what is good fruit, what is bad fruits. Someone who has not been transformed by these things, has not been transformed by the reality of Christ, cannot live in accordance with his sermon. So if we see any deviations from it, then there's a good chance that there's something wrong there. I mean, I'm not saying like if someone stumbles or something that you're just going to point at them and be like, bad fruit, I got to throw you out. No, please don't do that. We don't want to be like people who are going on a witch hunt and just looking for ways to excommunicate people or to cancel culture people, nothing without much thought. We want to have wisdom, we want to have grace, we want to have patience. But in the same breath, if we choose to ignore people like those that Jesus is warning us about here, then we're setting ourselves up, we're setting our church up for failure. Like a gardener or farmer overseeing their garden or orchard, there will come a day of judgment before Jesus for these folks. And like a good shepherd guarding his or her flock, we must be ready and prepared to protect our church. It's going to happen. We see teachers like this in culture time and again, within the church time and again. But I also would never hope to see this happen in our midst here at San Lo. But we should expect it to happen. We should plan for it and pay attention. So instead of pretending like it's never going to happen, again, we got to be ready for it. And in doing so, would we be taking Jesus' words here to heart? This is about false prophets, false teachers. But if Jesus cares so much about the fruit of false prophets and false teachers, just a quick side note, I hope that we are taking the fruit that we bear ourselves seriously. What are we producing? What are our gardens, our orchards? What's coming out from them? What fruits are we individually and collectively producing as a church body? It might not be coming from you, but maybe other people within the church. What are we all producing together? We're all called Sandlo. We're identified by one name, right? So it's not just like, oh, only what I do matters. Together, what we all do matters in bearing witness for Christ. I hope that we could chew on that. We don't have a whole lot of time to think about that now, but please take that home. Please take that idea home with you. Talk about it with each other in the car on the way home as you're eating lunch after this. I know you're probably hungry right now. You're like, Josh, stop preaching. But I'm going to be like, we're almost done. We're almost there. Hang in there with me, all right? But if you call Sandlo your home, we have a responsibility to each other that we call this place. Not this place, these people. That is the church that we call home. So last but not least, what is the last thing that we can do now that matters in light of eternity that Jesus is talking about here at the end of the Sermon on the Mount? How we believe in Jesus matters in light of eternity. How we believe in Jesus matters in light of eternity. Sure, we can talk the talk. You know, it's easy to talk. Everybody talks. But are we walking the walk? All right. Let's read verse 21 together. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Short and sweet verse. I'm sure in all of your English Bibles you see verses 21 to 23 grouped together. That's how it is in Greek as well. I don't want to talk about that too much. But if you browse verses 22 to 23, you'll see that 21 pretty much summarizes the paragraph, and we don't have all the time in the world to go through all that this morning because, again, I got to get you guys lunch, right? But we're just going to focus on this one verse. There are going to be many people who call Jesus Lord. Many people who call Jesus Lord. Lord, the term Lord back then, it was used to address God. Yes, that's true. That is correct. God is Lord. Jesus is Lord. But it also had a second meaning, right? A second usage in their day and age. It was a term that was also used to address people of high esteem, people like bosses or people who had a high standing in society's eyes. But how do we see Jesus as Lord between those two? We can see Jesus as a person of high esteem and treat him as such, but if we aren't doing the will of Jesus, if we're not doing the will of the Father who is in heaven, we don't get to spend eternity with Jesus. Sure, we can recognize him, recognize him as Lord, but do we recognize him as the God of our lives? Again, another contradiction, right? It sounds like a contradiction anyway. I have to do something to get into heaven. Josh, I thought you just said that salvation is grace-based, not works-based. Yes, that is unequivocally true. Unequivocally. Sorry, I said it so loud like that. I scared you guys. But anyway, take a peek over at verse 23 for a second. Even though I said we're not going to talk about those verses, just for a second, Jesus says, "And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness." I never knew you. Knew you. This is the key. This is the key right here. If we know Jesus, if we have a relationship with him, if we're taking the time to get to know him, to commune with him each and every day in our lives, that he would become a part of ourselves, then we're going to naturally fall in line with his will. If we love someone, we're going to become like them. If we love Jesus, we're going to become like Jesus. What happens then is that the impetus or the start to action isn't the desire to gain salvation. It's not, oh, I got to do this to be saved. I've got to do what Jesus has told me to do. But the impetus or the start is to return that love, to try and return that love and grace that Jesus has already granted to us. You know how in Asian culture, when we're given a gift, then oftentimes you feel like there's an obligation to give something back. I know with a name like Josh Scott, it's really obvious I'm Japanese, but trust me, I grew up going to Japan. Mom, love you. Thank you for that, Mom and Dad. But there's a difference between Asian cultures and Jesus' culture, is that we aren't obligated to give back, but we have the joy, we have the honor to give back. We get to give back. At the same time, I want us to know there's nothing that we could ever truly give back to Jesus that will ever be in the same weight class as what he's already given to us. It's just giving a piece of what he's already given to us back to him. There's nothing we could ever do for Jesus, nothing that we could ever say in his name that could equate to that gift. It's impossible. But what we can do, though, is live with an attitude of thankfulness, a heart of gratitude that will bring us over time in line with God's will. As Bible scholar Leon Morris once said about this verse, the contrast is not between merit and grace, but between profession and way of life. It isn't just professing faith in Jesus, but knowing Jesus personally. Even demons, right? They profess a belief about Jesus. They don't trust or love him. They don't have a relationship with him. He's calling us to know him, to be in a relationship with him. How is the way that we call Jesus Lord any different than the way that demons call Jesus Lord? It's by having a relationship with him. And sure, doing things for God is a part of faith that comes along with things after salvation, but those acts must first come from a heart for Jesus, in response to Jesus. This is why the things that we do in the present matters in light of eternity. Because the things that we do are a reflection of the inward reality of our hearts. So ask yourself, have I just gone to church, maybe even my whole life, but never fallen in love with Jesus? Have I just done the Christian thing, or have I just done this to be religious? Or have I just done this because my family has done this or my friends have done this? Or I think it's a convenient and moral way to live, so I'm just going to do that. That's good. I want to be moral. Are we truly in relationship with Jesus? Have we not only been with Jesus on Sunday mornings, but are we with him each and every day of our lives? Trying to. Religious people don't get into heaven. Jesus people do. Moral people do not get into heaven, but repentant sinners do. This is what all the Old Testament law and prophets that Jesus said was pointing to, that as we are transformed by the call to follow Jesus, following and entering the narrow gate throughout life's path, we are thereby placing our faith and our trust in him. For while the way with Jesus may be difficult at times for us, there is nothing more difficult than for Jesus to sacrifice himself for us. The old saying is true. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. But Jesus chose the narrow road, the narrow path before we ever got to, and he did it for you and for me. Then by rising from the dead to life, he has opened up the way for us to find life forever, eternally with him. Bringing it back for a second, it's funny that even when there was no guarantee something would happen on Y2K, people still took all the preparations seriously. We went to not me, but maybe they went to the grocery stores and stocked up and they were ready. They saw it as serious, even though it wasn't for sure. But we know that this eternity is for sure. We know that one day we are all definitely going to pass away. We are all going to go on to meet our Maker and meet Jesus at the gates of heaven. But even though we know that is going to happen, not guess or have a good estimate that is going to happen, it is going to happen. We're not doing a whole lot to prepare for that right now. We're all under that effect. But Jesus' desire for us from the entirety of the Sermon on the Mount here is that we would know him. Know Jesus. Would we love Jesus? Would we take seriously more and more the things that we are doing here now for Jesus? Because these are the things that matter in light of eternity. Again, we're not called to perfection. We are called to try. And when we do falter, when we do fall, Jesus gives us a way to turn back to him. Well, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, no matter what the people next to you have done, no matter what they have been through, we are all fallen sinners in need of God's grace. And he saves us, and he wants us to know him together. And will we take that seriously? For we are one another's brothers and sisters in light of eternity. Would we pray together now? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you, Lord, for saving us, for loving us, for making a way for us to know you. I know it's so easy for us to say and identify ourselves as Christians. Say we love you, to call you Lord. But when we take a magnifying glass to our own hearts, as you see ourselves, as you see us, we know that there are so many ways that we fall short and have fallen short. But Lord, you have made a way for us. You have granted us grace. You love us. You loved us first before we could love you. And it's because of your love for us that we are enabled to love you. As we learn what that means each and every day, as we learn what it means to love you, would you help us to love the people that you do? Help us to love the things that you do. Because just as you love us and we are broken people, there are broken people around us that need to be loved as well. And they might only experience your love through us, Lord. So how are we loving them? How are we loving our neighbors well? How are we moving forward towards them and not away from them? How are we seeing our brother or sister on the street, wherever they are, whatever situation that they've come from, no matter how we see them as an enemy or not, regardless of their politics, whatever they believe in, whatever way that they've treated us in the past, whatever hurts, Lord, how are you calling us to love? How are you calling us to know you? Help us to exercise wisdom, exercise grace, Lord, in all situations, in all choices, Lord. And help us, Lord, help one another as we live life together for you. Sure, in this short span, this short speck of life that we have here on earth that is small in light of eternity during our time together here, but also beyond. Lord, thank you. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.